Welcome to Love Thy Lawyer, where we talk to attorneys about their lives and careers. I'm Louis Goodman. Today, I'm talking with attorney Hans Sperling, the founder and principal of the Sperling Law Corporation, a firm that helps businesses close large transactions while protecting their legal rights. Hans has worked in Europe and Japan and was the senior managing editor of the Tulane Maritime Law Journal. He is an expert when overseas business comes calling. Hans Sperling, welcome to Love Thy Lawyer.
Thanks, Louis. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for being on the podcast today. Where are you talking to us from right now?
Downtown Los Angeles.
Is that where your office is?
Yes. Yep.
And how long have you been there?
Been here since about 2008. So what's that, 12, 14 years already.
I gave a brief introduction of your practice, but perhaps you could tell us, in your words, what your practice is about.
So I'm basically, corporate transactional lawyer. So I do the legal work for business. I think of myself as a deals lawyer because everyone, kind of understands that. I have a lot of background with international, as you mentioned in the introduction, international deal, mainly from Japan because I lived there for 7 years. And before being a lawyer, I also lived and worked other places, mainly in Europe, but also elsewhere in Asia.
Where are you from originally?
Well, I was born in Switzerland, but I'm not Swiss. My parents are American and they were there. But from the time I was, a kid, 3 to maybe, 13 or so, 2 to 13, we were in Pennsylvania, actually in Munich, Pennsylvania.
And where'd you go to high school?
Lancaster Catholic High School.
In Lancaster, Pennsylvania?
Right. That's where I started. And then my father was in the Foreign Service. He was a diplomat. He got out. That's why we were in Pennsylvania. Then he went back in. So I actually finished high school in Mexico at a school called Peterson-Loma High School, Mexico City.
Wow. And Lancaster has a very, it's sort of an Amish area, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's just interesting that you were born in Switzerland and you had this kind of European upbringing, and then you're in the middle of Pennsylvania in this very Amish, very kind of different sort of world than most of America. And so I just find that interesting in terms of your background and upbringing.
Yeah. In retrospect, at least, I feel very lucky that I had this kind of, rural, very American experience. We had 5 acres of land there was a cow pasture on one side and a cornfield on another side and wood on the other side. And it was very stable. It was a good, for that time period in your life until I was about 13. And then my father went back into the State Department and we started moving every couple of years. So it was really, I got to see these two worlds that in retrospect, I think was really great.
It must have been very different going from Lancaster, Pennsylvania to Mexico City.
It really was. And, I had no idea what to expect, but I actually loved it. Mexico City, obviously it's a huge city, but when you're there, your parents are with the embassy, you live in a very nice part of the city. You go to, a private school and, and frankly, it was easier. School was easier. I'd been in Catholic school in Pennsylvania, which is quite tough. At least it was then, academically and competitive. The private school was, it's just a little easier. My grades went up and didn't have to wear a uniform and my money went far. You get an allowance, you work over summers and you've got money to go out. So I had a great time there. I don't know how safe it is now. You had to be careful even then. But boy, for someone my age and my position, it was really a great time and a great kind of eye opener to a lot of things, how the world really works outside of Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Well, I think one needs to keep one's wits about them in any big city. But the thing that I was amazed at when I first went to Mexico City was what a huge capital city it is in a very European sense. And in my view, it is the most impressive city in North America in terms of what a city looks like and what a capital looks like. And I mean, there's a lot of great cities in North America, but I think Mexico City, just far and away, the most impressive city that you could go to in North America.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, obviously there's, a lot of poverty and a huge gap between rich and poor and security issues and all that. But yeah, it was, I mean, you say European, I remember, a lot of people I knew, classmates, their houses had been designed by, they have a little plaque and have the name of some French or Italian architect who designed the house and other buildings as well. Even the U.S. Embassy there is kind of extraordinary. It's built, I think, in the 50s or 60s, so it's a bit old. But yeah, it's restaurants, all different kinds of restaurants, and you could afford them. And in a lot of ways, at least if you're in, that socioeconomic group, doing reasonably well, it's quite a kind of sophisticated city.
Well, after you graduated from high school in Mexico City, where did you go to college?
So we moved to Munich, Germany, and the University of Maryland used to have a campus there, University of Maryland, Munich campus. And it was on an army base, U.S. Army base. And it was mostly military kids of military, and also kids of civilian employees of military. And there were a few other oddball people like me who either worked for a big American company, like the guy I knew, his father worked for, I think, Ford there. And then people just like me, my father worked at the American consulate. And it was a 2-year campus. So I went there and did an associate arts degree in international relations.
Again, another really big move, big change. I'm sure that going to school at with U.S. Army kids was a big difference from going to school with, kids in Mexico City. So what did that feel like, that change?
Again, no idea what to expect, but really enjoyed it. Munich is different from other German cities. It's the capital of Bavaria, the southern state, which is, that's where Oktoberfest is. And it's not just Oktoberfest. There's some kind of fest going on almost the whole year. So, it's a bit of a, I don't want to say party town in kind of a college sense, but a city that celebrates, all the time. And it's the beer capital of the world. I remember someone telling me when I was there that there are more breweries in Bavaria, that state, than in all the rest of the world combined.
Wow.
And you would pass them. I remember one subway stop, we'd go by one of the breweries and there's a very strong smell that they get off. It's actually not a very nice smell, but there's all that, and museums, art museums. It's actually a great place to spend your first 2 years of college.
Now, you got your AA degree there, and presumably you went on and got a bachelor's degree someplace. Did you take some time off between the time you got the AA and the time you finished your bachelor's?
I did, in fact, yeah.
What did you do?
At that point, my mother was in the Philippines, in Manila. She was working at the American Embassy. My parents were separated by then. And so I went there and I worked as a civilian employee of the Air Force for 2 years at the American Embassy.
Well, what did you think of Manila? I mean, I'm just like amazed at your travels in your young adulthood.
I'll tell you this anecdote. I was working and I was driving somewhere with my boss. So we were just chatting while we were driving. And he asked me, typical conversation in that group, where have you been posted before? And I said Mexico and Munich. And he said, well, which one did you prefer? And I said, I have to say Mexico because it's just, free. Life was good. Life was easy, and you kind of do what you wanted. And he was shocked because in that kind of milieu, everyone wants to go to Western Europe. In fact, it's hard to get stationed in Western Europe. And so I told him, in Manila for me was a lot like Mexico City.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I love Manila. I think it's an incredible place.
I had a great time there. And again, I was at the bottom of the ladder, in kind of the hierarchy of, government. But the money I made in Manila, I could live well. The best thing was, I had always wanted to scuba dive.
Yeah.
I watched these Jacques Cousteau films when I was young. And I got to the Philippines and you could do it. I found an instructor easily. I could afford it. During the not rainy season, I would go maybe every second or third weekend we'd go to and dive. You could do the whole weekend for $30-$40.
Wow. So you worked in the Philippines for a couple of years and then you went to college?
Yep. I went to Paris and I went to the American University of Paris, which is exactly what it sounds like. Small liberal arts college, American accredited, and was there for 2 years and got a bachelor's in international affairs.
Now, at some point, you decided that you were going to go to law school. So did you take time off between college and law school, or did you go right from American University in Paris to a law school?
Yeah, no, exactly. I took time off. First, I studied one more year. I went to the Sorbonne after graduating the American University just to study French language mainly and culture. And I kind of get my French up to a certain level because after 2 years, for me anyway, it's not enough to get that good at a language. So I did that. Also, I was waiting for a job. I interviewed for a job at OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's an intergovernmental organization based in Paris. And I'd interviewed and they wanted to hire me, but they didn't have funding yet for the position. So I kind of made the excuse of studying another year, get my French up and wait for them to get funding. And it eventually came true. Took about, that year that I was at the Sorbonne. And so then I was there for three years at the OECD in their environment directorate, they called it.
Now, at some point, you decided that you wanted to be a lawyer, that you wanted to go to law school. What was it that prompted you to decide that's my career path?
In my undergrad program, we had to take one course in international law. And the guy who taught it was an American lawyer. He was like an adjunct. He was working during the day at the International Energy Agency. And then, he would take some time out to come and teach it. And I just found it fascinating. I've always liked researching and writing. So that seemed like it was a good fit. I kind of liked he would often bring in news articles that talked about international law and then analyze them, or we'd analyze them in class. It's kind of interesting to me that a lot of times they were wrong, you actually kind of applied the law and worked through it. They were either, greatly simplified or they just kind of didn't get it right. So I had this feeling of international law or law as kind of letting you see behind the curtain, kind of see things that everyone can't see. And I was attracted to that too. And in particular, a lot of the cases that we read, because they were borderline cases, that's why they're interesting cases to read. They oftentimes involved shipping. Something happens on a ship. What law applies? If the ship is in port, is it different? That kind of thing. So I got interested in maritime law. So I actually focused on that in law school. That was a big draw for me. Also, I was working at the OECD on international environmental law. So that was also something I wanted to explore at law school or see if I wanted to.
So where did you go to law school?
I went to Tulane in New Orleans.
Why Tulane in New Orleans, given that you have, you could go anywhere. Why did you choose Tulane in New Orleans? And one of the reasons I ask is I got into Tulane Law School in New Orleans and I gave some thought to going there. I ended up not going there, but it's always been a school that's interested me.
The main reason was the maritime law. They have by far the best maritime law program in the U.S.
Yeah, I've heard that.
One of the top, and I would say one of the top 3 or maybe 5, but probably top 3 in the world. For example, the University of San Francisco Law School at that time, I don't know if it's changed, they had the second best, and they had, I think, like 4 or 5 maritime law classes. Tulane had 20, 25.
Wow.
So basically I did one year out of the 3 years of law school. 1 year was all maritime law. I was on the Maritime Journal. The other reasons that I went there were I wanted to explore environmental law, especially international, and they have a very strong program in that, and international and comparative law, which they also are strong in. Now, in those areas, there's other schools that are as strong, but maritime law is far and away the best. So I got in. Also, to be honest, you come, like you said, I was traveling and living all these different places, and I didn't really want to go to a great law school that was in a regular old city. kind of get used to moving every couple of years and everything is new and fascinating. And so for me, I was attracted to, New York, San Francisco, LA, or, New Orleans. It's a unique city. And actually, Louisiana has the French Civil Code.
Right.
Because, it was a French colony before. So, and they still use it. So it actually wasn't as kind of far out as it sounds, relative to my background. In fact, I was kind of lucky. A guy who'd gone to my university, American University, who also worked at OECD, I think we got together for lunch one time and he was applying to law school and he mentioned Tulane. And that was the first I'd ever heard of it.
Now, when you graduated from law school, you obviously went and worked and did some different things in the legal profession. Now you run this firm that does a lot of work in international law and international business in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you could, briefly walk us through your career path from the time you got out of law school to the time that you started working and developing this law practice in Los Angeles and what led you there.
So I went to San Francisco and, studied for the bar, got a job doing practice support, litigation support while I was studying for them. So I was there a little under a year. And then I found a job in Tokyo in Japan. It's my first job as a lawyer, admitted, In fact, I was actually admitted technically after I arrived in Tokyo by a couple months, 2 or 3 months. So yeah, I moved to Tokyo, a small firm, but that did a lot of international work. And yeah, moved over there, stayed at that firm for a couple of years, this Japanese law firm.
What did you think about living in Japan?
I enjoyed it. I don't know that I could have done it as well if I had not had that background of moving around and living different places. A lot of people, it's kind of too big of a change and they don't stay for very long, but I enjoyed it. As a junior associate, I was, spending a lot of time at the office. So I didn't spend as much time in Japan, but kind of out doing stuff. But I really enjoyed it. I started doing quite a bit of cycling. Cycling to work. And one of our client companies had a cycling club. And so the general counsel invited me. On holidays, they would go on cycling trips. And that's a really great way to see the country. I mean, to literally see the countryside as you're riding through it on a bike, So now, it's a huge city. There's a lot to do, lots of interesting stuff, and there's fantastic, say, Japanese food, obviously, but there's lots of other great food from around the world and all that kind of thing. Quite cosmopolitan, especially in that milieu where you're meeting international business people as your clients and other lawyers, doing the kind of thing that you're doing. And, I really enjoyed it. I have to say at that time, it was the most expensive city in the world. And you felt that, it made New York look cheap. So that was kind of the downside, but everything has some downside. But yeah, I was there 7 years in all. I was very happy with the kind of work that I got to do because, I wanted to do international, and being an American lawyer at a Japanese firm, I had to do international because I can't do Japanese law. You know what I mean? I can't even read Japanese really. So I got everything that I did was international in some way. And that was really great. Really enjoyed that.
After your 7 years in Japan, where'd you go?
That's when I came here to Los Angeles. I was at a firm in Long Beach for a while that does a lot of maritime, but I was actually in the corporate group. And then I struck out on my own.
When was that?
It would have been around, 2008, 2009.
Quite the time to be starting a new business.
Yeah, not really great timing on my part, but one nice thing, I guess, is about being a small firm. There's advantages and disadvantages, but, if you have 5 really active clients at one time, at least in my experience, you're busy. You don't need 50 clients. So it kind of works out that way. But yeah, it's been good. Good. My clients, go ahead.
I want to just kind of go back to academics and schooling a little bit for this reason. You must have taken the California bar at a later time than most people. And when you were in law school, you must have been older than most of the other people in the law school class. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm wondering what your notion about that was and is.
Yeah. So I'd worked 2 years, in the middle of my college, practicing and then 3 years in Paris. So it's 5 years roughly older than a typical student. There were other even older students. But I think the advantage was just that maybe I appreciated it more and I saw it less as kind of, I don't know, school and more as education, if that makes sense, as a life thing.
Do you think that all that work experience and time off and being in other places gave you the ability to focus more in law school as a law student?
In a way, yeah. I think it let me get something out of it that maybe not some of the younger students couldn't. I'll give you an example. Both in Paris and in Munich, the colleges had these study tours or cultural tours, they called them, because, we were in the middle of Europe. And you go somewhere on a weekend to another European city, somewhere like that, or on a break. And some of them were for credit, and there'd be lectures. And, for example, I went to one called the London Theatre Scene, and you attended 3 plays and you had lectures and an exam. You got 1 credit for it. I think it was 2 or 3 days. So I went on a lot of those. And, we thought of them as, people thought of them as easy credit, right? This isn't like your chemistry class or math class. I don't remember almost anything from my chemistry class, but those things were really an experience that I remembered. Frankly, so that one, the London Theatre Scene, I didn't really care about theater. I just wanted to go to London with a bunch of other students, right, for 2 or 3 days, have a good time. It got me interested in theater. After that, I went to theater anytime I passed through London, which that used to be how you got cheap flights, London, New York. I would stop, stay a night, and just walk around the theater district and go to a play. Or I would go to plays in Paris when I was there. Things like that really, looking back, I feel like were a big part of my development as a person, even though you could say academically, they weren't as hard as something else. I'm not sure that something being hard is necessarily better. It can be, but not necessarily.
Speaking of hard things, what bar exam did you take when you graduated from Tulane?
California.
Oh, okay. So you knew you wanted to come and practice law in California at some point.
I always kind of thought, I kind of assumed, I guess I'd go to New York. There's a lot of maritime work there, it's New York. But as I got closer to graduation, I guess it becomes more real. And you say, I said to myself, well, do I want to go to a kind of cold city in the Northeast? I mean, if I don't know anybody there anyway, why not go to a nice, sunny city on the West Coast? So in the end, I decided to come to California.
Smart. You've had all these experiences and you have ended up practicing law, being a lawyer. You continue to practice. What is it about practicing law that you really like that has kept you as a practicing attorney?
One reason that I like the analytical work. And, have you ever seen the movie Devil's Advocate? There was one really good line, I thought. So Al Pacino comes back as he's the devil, and he comes back to Earth at the end of days, right? The world is ending, and he comes back, and he's a lawyer. And at the very end, the hero of the story asks him, like, you could have come back as anything. Why a lawyer? And Al Pacino says, well, it's kind of the ultimate backstage path, isn't it? Like, you get to kind of see how things work that not everyone can see. And I think that's a big part of it.
If a young person were just coming out of school and thinking about law as a career choice, would you recommend that?
I would not recommend it to them in a blanket way. I would say, I would tell them things I like about it, like I was just saying. And I would also tell them, it's tough. It's not for a lot of people.
How is actually practicing law either met or different from your expectations?
I thought I'd be doing maritime law, and like most people who haven't practiced law, I figured most of what lawyers do is litigation. Maritime law is the admiralty jurisdiction, federal court. So I thought I'd be doing a lot of litigation in federal court, which, I really don't do. So I think that's been quite different than what I expected.
What about the business of practicing law? How's that gone for you? And, perhaps how is that either met or different from your expectations? And what sort of business advice can you give to lawyers?
I've heard a lot of lawyers say that they should teach marketing in law school, that it should be mandatory. It should be maybe one of those like first year classes that everyone has to take. And I have to say, I'm not I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but in a way it would be, because I can remember even when I was working in practice support right after law school, that there were the big corner offices that had the fancy furniture that was better than everybody else's furniture. Those were the rainmakers. They may or may not have been the best technical lawyers in the firm or the most knowledgeable. I don't know, but I doubt that they were. They were the rainmakers who had the big clients.
Yeah. There's a guy named Neil Tyra who does a podcast called The Law Entrepreneur, and he talks about the business of law, and he really feels that it's just virtual malpractice that law schools don't talk about legal marketing and running a business and the importance of being in business for lawyers. I think you're right.
Yeah. They'd be happier about what they spent to go to law school,
Yeah, I think you're right. What do you think's the best advice that you've ever received?
The details matter. Like, that's a lot of what you have to see the big picture too, but, details are exceedingly important.
What advice would you give to a young person who is just starting out a career as an attorney?
Always be thinking about finding your path. I would advise someone to always keep that in mind and try to make your own path rather than just follow the path that presents itself.
Do you think the legal system is fair?
I can't say yes in an absolute way. I wouldn't certainly not say no in an absolute way. I remember there's a phrase, I think I heard it in law school, a term, the administration of justice. And that term really struck with me because, you have justice, right, with a capital J, like carved into the granite on the courthouse. It sounds big, right? It's a huge word. And then you have administration, which sounds really sort of bureaucratic and very ordinary, very daily work kind of thing. So that to me, there was a juxtaposition in that term. And I think that's really true. Like, it's one thing, there is the sort of abstract, there's some justice and there's the problem that you have to be made to work every day through us, lawyers and judges and even clients. And it always comes back to the real world. And the real world is not always perfect or pretty.
How about recreational pursuits? Anything that you enjoy doing when not lawyering?
I tinker with guitar. Never got very good, but I really enjoy that. So I've sort of been teaching myself. I kind of retook that up 2 or 3 years ago, restarted, and I've been teaching myself, and I really enjoy that.
Let's say you came into some real money, several $1 billion. What, if anything, would you do differently in your life?
Pay any bills, pay any debt, but I might get into some areas of the law that I'm just interested in, or, sit down and start writing a book that, like, an idea that I may have had for years and just never kind of have time. I think I would do those kinds of things. Yeah.
Let's say that you had a magic wand. There was one thing in the world that you could change, the legal world or otherwise. What would that be?
I guess being in Japan for 7 years, they're much, much less litigious than we are. And I think it's not just the legal system. It comes from a culture. Their social harmony is much more important to them. And conflict is not, something to be avoided. If everyone could be just a little bit less confrontational, I think that would be a big improvement.
If someone wanted to get in touch with you and your firm, what would be the best way to do that?
I'd say go to my website, Sperling Law, LAW, or find me on LinkedIn.
We've had a wide-ranging discussion. Is there anything that you want to talk about that we haven't touched on?
No, I think we have covered a lot of stuff. It's been quite interesting. Quite interesting.
Hans Sperling, thank you so much for joining me today on the Love Thy Lawyer podcast. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
You too. Thanks a lot.
That's it for today's episode of Love Thy Lawyer. If you enjoyed listening, please share it with a friend and follow the podcast. If you have comments or suggestions, send me an email. Take a look at our website at lovethylawyer.com, where you can find all of our episodes, transcripts, photographs, and information. Thanks to my guests, and to Joel Katz for music, Brian Matheson for technical support, Paul Roberts for social media, and Tracy Harvey. I'm Louis Goodman.
you might aspire to that abstract kind of perfect thing, perfect legal system, but you should compare to, well, what's the alternative